Italian Pie is proud to support WYES and this episode of Wall Street Wrap-Up, and to promote the importance of financial literacy and education.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, Biden's budget battle. President Biden presents his idea of how he's going to raise billions of taxes, but you won't have to pay a penny unless you make over $400,000. Do you believe it? February's job numbers were released today, adding 311,000 more jobs into the economy, and increasing speculation that inflation is not going down fast enough. And it was the worst week for stocks for this year of 2023, with the California Regional Bank failure and fear of coming of higher interest rates, inflation continuing, and a slower growing economy. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more. It's Friday, and it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, I'm Andre Laborde. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. It's Friday, March the 10th, 2023. Coming up tonight, we're going to be discussing the upcoming debt crisis with the president of the Committee for Economic Development for the Conference Board, Lori Esposito Murray. And we'll be talking about the increasing debt and what is it going to happen about possible insolvency of Social Security, Medicare, and getting our fiscal house in order. Lori Esposito Murray coming up in just a moment. But here's how your money did this week. Well, this week, the failure of regional Silicon Valley Bank, known as SVB in California, and the thought of the Federal Reserve raising interest rates to a possible 50 basis points brought all the markets down for the week. The S&P 500's worst sectors were interest rate sensitive sectors such as technology, real estate, and materials. And this week, the Dow Jones closed today at 31,911, down just almost 4.5% for the week. The S&P 500 closed today at 3,861, down just over 4.5% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they closed today at 11,137, down just over 4.75%. Well, today, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released the jobs report for February. Last month's jobs report came in with strong employment of 311,000 jobs added to the economy. They were expecting lower job numbers of around 250,000 range. Now, normally, a higher number would be good, but this means the economy is still very strong, and that's bad for inflation. And the Federal Reserve meets later this month, and now with the possibility of them raising interest rates to 0.5% or 50 basis points, well, that thought is now growing greater. Leisure and hospitality picked up the most last month, adding just over 100,000 jobs in February. Well, how much longer can we be increasing a budget deficit? We're spending $1 trillion more than we're bringing in, and it's getting larger because of interest accruing. The president says he's only taxing the top 1%, and economist Milton Friedman always used to say, there's no free lunch. Well, Lori Esposito Murray, she's the president of the Economic Development of the Conference Board, and she's here with us tonight to discuss that. Hi, Lori. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
For so many years, our GDP, our gross domestic product, has always been ahead of the national debt. But right now, to my understanding, we're like at around 97%. Our national debt is at 97% of GDP, and it's about to overtake the GDP. What happens when that occurs?
It's very troubling. And we have not had this level of debt since the post-war period, since right after World War II. And there is a big difference between where we are now and World War II. We had the troops coming home, a brand new infrastructure and production base. And today we have an aging population. And we've just launched a major infrastructure program that's going to take years to put in place in terms of modernizing our infrastructure. And so as having the debt this high and not having the capacity for growth that we had after World War II really means that We start crowding out the federal budget because we have to pay for that debt. And crowding out the federal budget means we don't take care of our national priorities, or we just continue to accumulate more debt to take care of national priorities, and it shrinks and shrinks. It also causes interest rates to rise, and interest rates rising means more inflation.
Right after World War II in 1945, when our debt was as high as to the level it is to GDP, we had Social Security at the time, but we didn't have Medicare and Medicaid. Now you throw in the costs that the government is now having to pay on Medicare and Medicaid. So, I mean, would it be correct to say that some people think, well, yeah, well, we were able to get out of it in the late 1940s, right after World War II, so why can't we get out of it now?
Well, healthcare is the fastest growing part of the budget. And what's interesting, and for people to understand, is that only about a third of the budget is actually decided every year by Congress. And then you have the mandatory spending, which is mainly healthcare and Social Security. And so as we have an aging population and more retirees, more and more people on Medicare, that becomes more and more expensive, and also controlling costs in healthcare, which are rising more rapidly than other costs.
How much more will our GDP, our gross domestic product, have to grow to be able to keep up with the expanding interest that's being accumulated on our debt?
With inflation, you have interest on the debt rising. And as interest on the debt rises, that means actually servicing the debt rises. And so you have your federal budget pie, and that servicing of the debt becomes more and more expensive as interest rates rise. The Conference Board, as well as other economists, really believe that we'll have inflation for several more years. This is something that's not going away quickly. And so the interest on the debt, so long as we ignore it or keep growing it, will take up more and more and more of the budget. And as I said, it really will choke our ability to meet our needs as a nation, our national priorities.
Mm-hmm. I think I read a report by the Conference Board recently where they took a report from CEOs, and most CEOs right now are saying that we will be going into a recession, whether it be in the first half of 2023 or the second half of 2023, but one will be coming. Whether it be a hard landing or a soft landing, it's to be determined. But with us wanting to keep ahead of the interest rate by keep growing the GDP, but if we go into a recession, what type of a problem will this create?
As you go into recession, your tax base gets smaller, and so you're only enhancing the problem you have, because your revenues go down as your budgets. If you do nothing with your budgets, they just continue to run deficits.
Lori, to the average person who's watching right now, I know they're understanding about debt. They understand about deficits and such. But I'm curious, I would imagine most people think, well, how does that affect me? To the average person, the consumer, what we're talking about right now on this national debt overtaking our GDP and interest rates, what will this create to the average person on the street?
Interest costs rise. And as your interest costs rise, that affects inflation within your entire economy. And we all know we've now been dealing with inflation for at least a year. And we all know that the impact that has on our daily lives. I mean, it affects the price of gas, our ability to get around. It affects food prices. It affects mortgages. And so, very significant impact. And the debt helps to spiral the cost of interest, the rate of interest. And that has a very debilitating effect in terms of being able to control inflation.
Mm. I read your report and from the Conference Board on the problems with what we're talking about, the national debt, and also Social Security and Medicare. And one of the things that I caught, and forgive me because I'm doing this from memory right now, but you said an immediate reversal will have to be taking effect immediately or else. And it caught my eye because now I'm thinking, first off, if I have it correct, the way you have it in the report. But I'm thinking of two questions. First off, how much of a reversal do we need? And second, what is the or else?
We'll start with or else.
Yeah.
Or else could be
Okay.
cataclysmic in terms of the economy. And uh, it's hard to know when that will, what will trigger that, when it will happen. And I think if you look what happened in Britain just this year, when the markets lost confidence in the Prime Minister Truss's budget, they got really nervous and they started really withdrawing from the British economy and supporting the British economy. And immediate actions had to be taken so that there wouldn't be a collapse. And so that was a financial budget decision that the Prime Minister made to cut taxes, and obviously wasn't curtailing spending, and caused a trauma in the system. And so you don't know actually when that's going to happen, but where is it that you want to get? And that's what we looked at in our report. And there's a lot of support for, looking for a stable, sustainable debt to GDP ratio, particularly for a advanced country like the United States. What's a stable, sustainable debt to GDP ratio? And 70% of debt to GDP, and remember, we're at 98% now. 70% is what we saw as a sustainable level that's pretty much embraced by the International Monetary Fund for advanced economies, of the type of debt that an advanced economy should carry that is a sustainable level. I will tell you, it's very much higher than where we were prior to the Great Recession in 2008. We were at 35% of debt to GDP at that time. And there was a lot of concern then that we were carrying too much debt. And so how do you get there? And that's what we looked at. You want to get to 70% more sustainable. How do you get there from 98%? Well, first, you've got to recognize that we're on a trajectory, as you said, up to 107%, 108% by 2028. We're looking at 198% by 2053. So how do you turn it around? And you've got to start now. It was a mix of cutting taxes, different scenarios, cutting taxes, cutting spending, doing both. And you can't get there in any time shorter than 20 to 30 years in our forecasting. Otherwise, your cuts in spending or your raising of taxes is so draconian in that first 10 years that it actually causes deeper recessions.
You've been from the White House with President Bill Clinton to many, so you've been in government and you've been in private business as well too. Well, when you work with government, and I'm thinking of Congress, they don't usually move until the 11th hour. And as an example, we've got a debt limit that's coming up in June, and I'm assuming that finally something's going to get hashed out on the 11th hour at 11 p.m. the night before, if not at midnight. How do you get Congress to be able to do something now?
Well, I will add, in my resume, I actually spent almost a decade working in the Senate for Senator Nancy Pelosi,
right.
from Kansas, and so I definitely know the pace of congressional decision making. But I will tell you, I actually think the past couple of years since COVID started have been extremely impressive, and the narrative is actually the opposite, that Washington doesn't function. We have seen bipartisan support to address both the economic and the geopolitical fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Hopefully, the impact that inflation will have on debt servicing will draw the attention of members of Congress, and I believe it is. The debt we're servicing now actually equals the amount of money, just about equals the amount of money we spend on education. And in a couple of years, it's going to equal the amount of money we spend on defense. And defense is about half of that 1/3 of the budget that Congress actually votes on. And so it's almost difficult to imagine having a debt servicing of that amount.
In Louisiana, there was a Senator Russell Long, and he was very powerful, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He used to have a saying: "Don't tax you and don't tax me. Tax that fella under the tree." And it's simple, but it makes a point. Can you grow out of what we're talking about by just raising taxes, and not on everybody, but only on the top 1%?
You can, and the Committee for Economic Development, and we have our trustees are business leaders, and so we consider ourselves who help with our research and our solutions, and we consider ourselves a business-led think tank. You can't just do it, by taxing a small percent of the public. But we've been for tax reform, and history has shown, and getting rid of preferential treatments. And history has shown whenever the U.S. has done tax reform that we actually raise revenue. So it's getting rid of preferential treatments, it's broadening and expanding the tax base. And that's how you're going to actually, on the tax side, be able to start grappling with this problem. But I will tell you, in our scenarios, so we ran our 10, 20-year scenarios in terms of how do you get this outsized debt of almost 100% of debt to GDP right now. How do you get down to 70%? You can't do it with just raising taxes.
Do you think, Lori, by lowering the tax rate, that will bring in more revenue? With the budget cuts of 2017, there was I think it was Congressman Patrick McHenry this week was on a financial show, and he was saying that 1.9 trillion was brought in over the last couple of years because of the lowering of tax rates. Now, it wasn't the fact that we have an income problem, it's because we have the spending problem. So it still shows a worse than ever deficit. Your thoughts?
The best way to do that is to look at it comprehensively, get rid of preferential treatments, move towards what's called tax neutrality. Really and we've seen in the past that when we've actually done tax reform on those principles, that we've actually raised tax revenue.
Well, we've got two parties in government right now. One party, everything has to be paid for by the top 1%. And another party says we want to lower taxes to be able to be bringing in more revenue. But when I hear broadening the tax base, would I correctly think of saying that it has to be more than the top 1%, but 100% of the tax base, or something similar to that?
Well, what's key here is removing the preferential treatments in the tax in our current tax policy. And by removing those, that is what makes our tax policy fairer, and also helps to increase revenue. So that's really key.
Lori, coming up in June, we've got the debt ceiling. That it's always normally they plan it around Christmas time because nobody wants to shut the government down during Christmas. Being in government and working with government, you understand how politics plays. But in June, the debt ceiling is coming up. Now, it's eventually going to be agreed to. But you've got the Democrats who say we want to have it raised without any type of amendments to it. And the Republicans are saying, no, hold the phone. We want to go ahead and to be able to have some type of cuts before we can approve this debt ceiling. What are your thoughts? What's going to happen?
So the debate is actually as important as the outcome. And what I mean by that is that in 2011, when the U.S. credit rating was downgraded for the first time, it was downgraded because of the debate that was taking place, not because they didn't eventually reach a resolution on whether to raise the debt ceiling or not. And of course, the debt ceiling was eventually raised, but it was the debate itself that caused the uncertainty in the markets and caused the U.S. credit rating for the first time to be downgraded. And so what's important here is we're dealing with a fragile economy, and we're coming out of COVID. We're coming out of the shocks from the war in Ukraine. These are two major shock periods back to back. And to be having the debate on the debt ceiling now and causing uncertainty as to whether the U.S. is or is not going to be able to pay the bills that it has incurred is really damaging to our economy and to our recovery. Now, it's an opportunity, and of course, we don't go over the cliff, but it is an opportunity to actually raise these issues of debt and of spending, and the need to get our fiscal house in order, which is motivating some of the debate going on that okay, we didn't do it at this time, we didn't do it at that time, and now we have everyone's attention. What we're recommending is that's too dangerous, it's too unpredictable, and we have an economy that's trying to recover, and we're grappling with pending recession and trying to get control of inflation. Raise the debt ceiling or suspend the debt ceiling, stop the debate, but link it to a commission or a committee of members of Congress, bipartisan, who will sit down under a timetable and determine, okay, how are we going to approach this budget? How are we going to move towards more responsible fiscal policies?
Lori, a couple of months back, we had David Walker, who was the former Comptroller General of the U.S., and we were talking about Social Security, the problems of unfunded mandates of the Social Security system, how the problems it's occurring. And I don't know in 1935 how many workers there was to a retiree, but he brought up something. He said in 1951, we had about 16 workers for every retiree. Today, and this is back in November or December of last year, he said we right now have about 3 workers for every retiree. I don't know if we still have the 3 workers for every retiree, but if that's the case, and seeing the trajectory going from 16 to now 3, what's going to have to work and happen with Social Security?
The trust fund is approaching insolvency. The Medicare trust fund and the Social Security trust fund is approaching insolvency, and Medicare will reach that in 2028, and Social Security is expected to reach insolvency by 2034. So these are, it's the sword of Damocles hanging over our head, and there is still time if we could actually our political leadership and the leadership in our country. I think the private sector plays a very important role in this. Actually, sit down and work on solutions, manage this problem that we have now. We still have time to deal with it with responsible policies and taking new initiatives to deal with the insolvency of both those absolutely critical programs. And it's not cutting Social Security. It's not killing Medicare. It's reforming Medicare and saving Social Security. And it's a management and leadership responsibility on the part of our leaders in Washington to make sure that these programs remain solvent.
Lori, do you think that there's so much of a paralysis? I mean, you've worked in the Senate, in the Senate, so you understand the thinking of behind the scenes. But do you think there's such a paralysis that they know that whoever brings up the word reforming or touching Social Security, the other side is going to be saying, we're going to throw grandma off the cliff?
Well, I think one of the saddest results of the State of the Union address was the fact that it was proclaimed that there's a consensus to not touch Social Security and not touch Medicare. And that is the opposite of where we need to be. We need responsible and reasonable leaders sitting down and finding responsible and reasonable solutions to both of these problems. They are Medicare is the fastest growing part of the budget. They are 2/3, just about together. They are about 2/3 of the budget that is part of the mandatory spending that Congress doesn't vote on every year. It's just built in. And, as you were mentioning, our demographics are changing. We have an aging population. I actually think, and I may sound more encouraging than your question was implying in terms of what the situation is. but there is in Congress right now a group of very responsible leaders who recognize that if we start now and manage these two programs, these two very important programs, we can save them, we can manage them properly, and we don't have to go over the cliff when they reach insolvency and then do massive funding bailouts that will only add to the debt, that only continues this increasing cycle of instability in our fiscal health.
Well, Lori, I'm with you. I want to look at the glass as being half full. I'm completely in your side, your corner. Lori, I'm out of time, but I hope you come back.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lori. Well, if you have a question or a comment about the show, would love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it pithy, and write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. So let's look at the market heading into next week. But first, what invention was created in Boston on this day in 1876 that we still use every day? You'll find out in just a moment. Well, what invention was created in Boston on this day in 1876 that we still use every day? It's the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell. In fact, a year later, Bell offered to sell the commercial rights to the telephone for $100,000 to Western Union, and they rejected the offer, thinking the telephone was just a kid's toy and just a passing fad. Wow. And finally, for a wrap-up of Wall Street, last year, vinyl records outsold CDs for the first time since 1987. 41 million vinyl albums were sold in 2022 compared to about 33 million CDs of last year. Now, you may be paying more to fly. American Airlines is bumping pilot pay up 40%, and that was following a similar bump earlier by Delta Airlines. Well, how would you like to go to sea for 3 years? Life at Sea Cruises is offering a 3-year sea cruise for $30,000 per year. Now, you have to sign up for all 3 years. Now, you'll be going to 375 ports around the world, and at $30,000 a year, it's still cheaper than apartments in some cities. Well, that's a wrap on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Join me next week when my guest is going to be Jason Brady, President and CEO of Thornburg Investment Management with over $40 billion of assets under management. All next week, Jason Brady, President and CEO of Thornburg Investment Management. And that's our show for this Friday, March the 10th, 2023. My thanks so much to Lori Esposito Murray for joining us this evening, but especially I want to thank you for allowing us into your homes this evening. Have a fun weekend with the ones you love and a productive week as well. I'll be here next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Italian Pie is proud to support WYES and this episode of Wall Street Wrap-Up, and to promote the importance of financial literacy and education.